I still remember that morning vividly, the moment when my entire world came crashing down. If someone had told me before that a heart could break from just a few words, I would have laughed. But that was before I stood in the doorway, clutching my newborn twins, watching the man I loved most walk away without looking back. If heartbreak had a sound, it would be the quiet click of that closing door. I used to believe that love could conquer anything, that as long as we had each other, no storm could tear us apart. But I was wrong. Love, I learned that day, isn't always strong enough to triumph over greed, ambition, and the cold manipulation of a woman who called herself a mother. That was the day I realized my children, and I had never truly belonged in his world. I met Daniel on a golden autumn afternoon when the streets of New York were blanketed with falling leaves. I was an interior designer, newly moved to the city, filled with dreams and determination after graduating from college. Daniel Montgomery, though I didn't know it then, was the heir to the powerful Montgomery and Company real estate empire, a dynasty that owned luxury properties from Manhattan to Los Angeles. But when I first saw him, he wasn't a Montgomery. He was just Daniel, the man with the easy smile and bright blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. We met by chance in a quiet little cafe tucked between two brownstones. I was sketching ideas for a project, and he asked if he could borrow my pen. Somehow, that simple question turned into hours of conversation that neither of us wanted to end. We fell in love quickly, recklessly, the way only two hearts untouched by reality can. Daniel wasn't like the other wealthy men I had met. He never flaunted his privilege, never treated me like I was beneath him. He was kind, grounded, and made me feel as if I was the only person who mattered in his world. Those first months were the happiest of my life. I loved him with everything I had, blindly, completely, believing that love was enough. But I didn't yet understand the weight of the Montgomery name, or the legacy that would eventually crush us both. Because in their world, love was never enough. When I found out I was pregnant, Daniel was overjoyed. He lifted me into his arms, spinning me around with tears in his eyes, whispering that he would protect me and our child for as long as he lived. In that moment, I believed him. I believed that love could shield us from everything, the gossip, the family expectations, the cold, distant world he came from. But love and promises, I would soon learn, were no match for his mother, Margaret Montgomery. Margaret was the kind of woman whose very presence commanded attention. Her gray eyes were sharp, unyielding, and her composure as flawless as the diamonds that glimmered around her neck. Her voice was calm, but beneath that composure was a heart made of steel. I met her for the first time, just a week after Daniel learned I was pregnant. She invited us to a grand celebration at the Montgomery estate, a mansion that seemed more like a museum than a home. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the room, illuminating walls adorned with priceless paintings. The air smelled of old money and quiet judgment. From the moment I stepped inside, I knew I didn't belong there. The women, wrapped in shimmering gowns and dripping in jewels, regarded me with polite disdain. Their eyes lingered on my simple dress, the one I'd bought for the occasion, as though it betrayed the fact that I came from a different world. The men, most of them Daniel's father's business associates, barely glanced in my direction as they murmured over their glasses of champagne. And then there was Margaret, seated like a queen at the center of it all. Her hand cradled a glass of red wine, her lips painted to match. When her eyes met mine, the polite smile she offered was so practiced, so perfect, it chilled me more than open hostility ever could. "Daniel tells me you're pregnant," she said at last, her tone smooth and detached. How unexpected. Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. I tightened my grip on Daniel's hand, feeling the tension in his fingers. He tried to mask his discomfort with a strained smile, but I saw the worry flicker behind his eyes. That night, Margaret said nothing more to me. But she didn't need to. I could feel her silent verdict pressing down on me, the unspoken declaration that I would never be accepted into her world. And I was right. In the days that followed, Daniel began to change. He became distant, distracted. The warmth that once defined his every glance started to fade, replaced by a quiet unease he couldn't hide. Sleepless nights became common, and I often caught him whispering into his phone, his voice low and tense. Every time I asked, he would force a smile and say, "It's nothing, love. Don't worry." But I did worry. Deep down, I knew something was breaking between us, something I couldn't fix. By the time I gave birth to our twins, the man who once swore to protect us felt like a stranger. I knew something was wrong. Daniel was still there at the hospital, still smiling softly as he cradled our newborn twins, but something in his eyes had changed. There was a distance between us now, invisible yet impossible to ignore, like a wall quietly rising where love once flowed freely. For days after we brought the babies home, I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion or nerves. That we'd adjust. That once the sleepless nights settled and we found our rhythm as parents, things would go back to how they were. But deep down, I knew. Someone, had already come between us. Then came the morning that confirmed it. It was early, sunlight barely touching the edges of our apartment curtains when Daniel walked in. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow, as though he were carrying the weight of the entire world on his back. I was sitting by the crib, rocking the twins as they stirred softly in their blankets. When I saw him, I smiled, hopeful that maybe, finally, he had come home ready to start the new life we'd dreamed about. But that hope vanished the moment I saw his face. "We need to talk," he whispered. Something inside me froze. I placed the babies gently into their crib, my heart pounding in my chest as I turned to face him. "What's wrong, Daniel?" I asked, my voice unsteady. He didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the floor, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to find the words. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of what he was about to say. "I can't do this anymore," he murmured. "I just can't." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "Can't do what?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. He took a deep breath, as if the truth itself was poison he couldn't bear to swallow. "I have to leave." The room seemed to tilt around me. The air grew thin, icy. I felt my heart splinter, each fragment cutting deeper than the last. "Leave?" I repeated, barely able to form the word. "What do you mean, Daniel?" He finally looked at me then, and the pain in his eyes was almost worse than anger would have been. Because it wasn't confusion I saw there. It was resignation. "My mother was right," he said, voice breaking. "We don't belong in the same world. I can't stay." Tears blurred my vision before I even felt them fall. "You're leaving me?" I choked out. "Leaving your children?" "Because she told you to." He said nothing. Not a word. Just stood there, a man torn between love and fear, between his heart and the cold grip of the Montgomery legacy. And in that silence I understood. The man I loved, the one who once promised to protect me, who swore we'd face everything together, was gone. In his place stood a stranger. A coward. A puppet bound by his mother's strings. A man willing to trade his wife and children for the comfort of his inheritance. Daniel turned his back to me and walked toward the door. I wanted to scream, to run after him, to beg him to stay, but my body refused to move. Every part of me was frozen, trapped between disbelief and heartbreak. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. But he didn't look back. Not once. The door closed with a sharp, final sound that echoed through the apartment like the end of a life I'd once known. And just like that, he was gone. For a long time, I sat there staring at the door, waiting, hoping that it might open again. That he would rush back in, fall to his knees, and tell me this was all a mistake. That love was stronger than his fear, stronger than his mother's grip. But the door never opened. In that small apartment, it was just me and my newborn twins, two tiny, innocent souls, blissfully unaware of the heartbreak that had just torn their world apart before it even began. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I looked at them lying peacefully in their crib, their little chests rising and falling with each soft breath. They didn't know that their father had just walked away. That I was now both mother and father, protector and provider, holding together the pieces of a life that had shattered in an instant. The days that followed were the darkest I've ever known. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I could barely breathe. Every moment felt like I was drowning, caught between grief and exhaustion. My body still ached from childbirth, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emptiness inside me. At night, the apartment was silent except for the sound of my babies crying. Their fragile wails echoed off the bare walls, mingling with my own quiet sobs. I would hold them close against my chest, whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that everything would be okay, that I'd never let them feel the abandonment I felt. But deep down, I was breaking. I couldn't forget the image of Daniel standing there, his eyes filled with guilt but no real fight, no hesitation. He had made his choice. He had chosen the easy path, the one paved with wealth and obedience, leaving me to face the wreckage alone. All the promises he'd once made, the vows, the words of forever, had dissolved into nothing more than echoes in an empty room. During those first few weeks, I became a ghost of myself. I shut out the world completely. My phone rang constantly, friends, colleagues, people who had once been part of my life, but I never answered. I didn't have the strength to explain, or to hear the pity in their voices. All I could do was hold my children and try to remember how to breathe again. I didn't know how to face anyone anymore. What could I possibly say when all I had left was a shattered heart, and two tiny babies depending on me? Every time the phone rang, I ignored it. Every knock on the door went unanswered. I wasn't ready to speak, to explain, to relive the pain. But one night, as rain pattered softly against the window pane, a quiet truth settled over me, a truth I could no longer ignore. I didn't have the luxury to fall apart anymore. Two small souls needed me. If I continued to drown in grief, who would take care of them? Who would hold them when they cried, or comfort them when they were sick? Daniel had chosen to walk away from his family, but I never would. I wiped away my tears, took a deep, trembling breath, and told myself, out loud, that I had to get up. That night marked the first time in days I'd stood without collapsing. The next morning, with the twins asleep in their crib, I opened my laptop and began searching for work. I had once been an interior designer at a small but promising firm in Manhattan. I loved that job, the creativity, the late-night design sessions, the satisfaction of seeing a space transform under my care. But when my pregnancy progressed, I had taken a break, planning to return once the babies arrived. I never expected that by the time I was ready, everything else in my life would have fallen apart. When I reached out to my old firm, I learned that my position had already been filled. They were sympathetic, but business had to go on. I understood, but the rejection still stung. I started sending out applications everywhere, architecture studios, design agencies, even furniture stores that needed consultants. But every reply I received was the same: "We're sorry, but you're not the right fit." Some employers were blunt enough to tell me why. A single mother with newborns? They'd say, "We need someone who can work late, travel, meet clients on short notice." Others were more polite, wrapping their refusal in professional niceties that still cut just as deep. Each rejection email felt like another door closing, another reminder that my life no longer fit neatly into anyone's expectations. But giving up wasn't an option. I didn't have that privilege anymore. There were days when the exhaustion felt unbearable, when I wanted to scream, cry, or just disappear. But then I'd look down at the crib, at two pairs of bright, trusting eyes staring back at me, and I'd remember why I couldn't quit. They were my reason now. My strength. My purpose. So I learned to survive differently. I cut out every unnecessary expense, sold whatever I didn't need, and learned to stretch every dollar to its limit. Some nights, dinner was just toast and tea, but my babies never went hungry. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was the one I was determined to rebuild, piece by piece, with my own hands. I couldn't afford childcare, so I had to manage everything on my own. The sleepless nights continued, not because I was drowning in grief anymore, but because my babies took turns waking, crying, and needing me. I learned to live in fragments of time, minutes between feedings, seconds between diaper changes. I became an expert at multitasking. I could cradle one baby with one arm, change a diaper with the other, and still scroll through job listings on my phone. My life had become a careful balance between motherhood and survival. Since leaving the house wasn't an option, I turned my focus to remote work, hoping to earn just enough to keep us afloat. After weeks of sending out emails, filling out applications, and facing one rejection after another, I finally got a break, a small freelance project for an interior design company that worked entirely online. The pay was modest, barely enough to cover rent and essentials, but to me, it was everything. Night, after putting the twins to sleep, I'd sit at my desk, the dim glow of my computer screen illuminating the dark, quiet room. The world outside was asleep, but my mind was alive, focused, determined. I drafted designs, created layouts, and poured every ounce of creativity I had left into my work. Those months were a true test of endurance. I was a mother, an employee, and the sole provider for two tiny lives who depended on me for everything. There were nights when exhaustion felt unbearable, when my hands trembled on the keyboard, my eyes heavy from lack of sleep. There were mornings when I'd stare at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman looking back. But no matter how tired I was, I refused to give up. I had already lost too much. I wasn't going to lose myself too. Gradually, I began to notice something change. The pain that had once consumed me wasn't as sharp anymore. It was still there like a scar that refused to fade, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer the woman who sat crying in the corner of an empty room. I was a mother of two. A survivor. And I would not let life break me. Still, I knew this couldn't be it. The freelance projects paid the bills but barely. I needed something bigger, something of my own. A dream that didn't rely on anyone's approval or permission. The idea came to me one quiet afternoon, as I was folding my twins' clothes. I paused, staring at the tiny shirts and rompers in my hands, realizing how similar they all looked: plain, ordinary, uninspired. The beautifully designed baby clothes I saw online were outrageously expensive, and the affordable ones were cheaply made. That was when the thought struck me, simple yet powerful. What if I could create something better? Something made with care, creativity, and love. Something that reflected what I wanted for my children, a balance of beauty, comfort, and meaning. That moment became the spark that would change everything. I remember sitting one evening, folding my twins' tiny clothes, when a simple thought crossed my mind: why not create children's clothes that were both beautiful and comfortable? I wasn't a fashion designer. My degree was in interior design, and my world had always revolved around spaces, not stitches. But I had always loved creating things with my hands. When I was a little girl, my mother had taught me how to sew small dresses for my dolls. She wasn't a professional seamstress, just a patient, loving woman who believed in making something beautiful out of whatever you had. She's been gone for years now, but her lessons had quietly stayed with me. So I decided to try. I borrowed an old sewing machine from my downstairs neighbor, a clunky, well-worn thing that rattled whenever I pressed the pedal, and began small. My first creations were simple: soft cotton onesies, stretchy leggings, and tiny floral dresses for baby girls. Each piece was made from leftover fabric I could afford from local shops. At first, I made them just for my twins. I wanted them to have something special, something made with love. But when I shared a few photos online, something unexpected happened. A couple of friends messaged me asking where I'd bought the outfits. When I told them I had made them myself, they asked if I could make some for their babies too. That was the moment I realized I might have an opportunity. I didn't have much money to invest, but I had something better: determination. Every spare dollar I earned from my freelance design work went into buying fabric, thread, buttons, and packaging. I watched tutorials late at night to improve my sewing skills, learned how to refine my patterns, and even studied how to manage an online store. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was harder than I ever imagined. I listed my products online, small batches of baby clothes made with care, but for weeks there was nothing. No sales, no interest. I emailed dozens of mom and baby bloggers hoping for a feature, but none replied. Once I even got an order, only for the customer to cancel at the last minute. Every rejection stung, every silence made me wonder if I was just chasing another dream that wasn't meant for me. One night, overwhelmed and exhausted, I almost packed everything away. But as I sat by the crib, watching my twins sleep soundly in the little outfits I had sewn with my own hands, I felt something shift inside me. I couldn't give up, not now. I had already come too far, endured too much. So I changed my approach. I taught myself basic photography and began taking better, more professional photos of my clothes: soft lighting, natural backgrounds, every stitch captured in detail. I built a simple website, clean and heartfelt, where I shared not only my products but also my story, my journey as a single mother trying to rebuild her life from nothing. I started a small blog, writing about motherhood, resilience, and creativity. I joined online parenting groups, not to sell, but to connect, to share what I was going through and offer support to others walking similar paths. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something started to change. The first order came in, a young mother from Chicago who'd found my blog and wanted to buy a matching set for her twins. It wasn't a big sale, but it meant everything. As I wrapped that first package with trembling hands, I realized that this was more than a business. It was proof that I could create something beautiful out of heartbreak, that I could still build a future, stitch by stitch. She ordered a newborn outfit for her baby girl, a soft pastel onesie with tiny hand-sewn details. When the payment notification appeared on my screen, I burst into tears. Not because of the money, but because it was proof that I wasn't hopeless. Someone out there believed in me, in what I had created with my own two hands. That single order became the spark that reignited my faith. Then came the second order. Then the third. Slowly, new names began appearing in my inbox, mothers from different cities, some even from across the country. They wrote to thank me, telling me how soft and comfortable the clothes felt on their baby's skin. Some even attached photos of their little ones wearing my designs, their tiny faces radiant with innocent joy. Each message felt like a whisper of encouragement, reminding me that all the sleepless nights, all the tears were worth it. I decided to name my brand Little Blessings, because that's exactly what my twins had given me, a reason to keep going when everything else had fallen apart. The following months were a blur of chaos and determination. My days had no clear beginning or end. I cared for my children, sewed new pieces, packed orders, and managed my growing online store all from my tiny apartment. The space that was once our home had transformed into a miniature workshop, piles of colorful fabrics stacked against the walls, ribbons and buttons scattered across the floor, and the rhythmic hum of my borrowed sewing machine filling the air. Every morning, I woke before my twins stirred, answering customer emails and planning new designs. In the afternoons, while they napped, I cut fabric and stitched hems. And when night fell, when the world outside was silent and my babies finally slept, I studied, devouring everything I could about marketing, online branding, and small business growth. I was exhausted beyond words, but for the first time in years I felt alive. Then one morning, everything changed. One of my social media posts, a photo of my twins wearing matching Little Blessings outfits, was shared by a well-known mom influencer on Instagram. In her caption, she praised the quality, comfort, and timeless charm of my designs. Overnight, my inbox exploded. Messages, orders, collaborations, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I refreshed my shop dashboard again and again, unable to believe the numbers climbing before my eyes. I laughed. I cried. I didn't know what else to do. Within days, I was struggling to keep up with the overwhelming demand. I had to call a friend to help me pack and ship orders, just to meet deadlines. Soon after, I partnered with a small local workshop to help produce my most popular pieces while I focused on design and brand management. In just 6 months, Little Blessings had grown from a desperate mother's late-night dream into a recognized name in the children's fashion world, a brand built not from wealth or influence, but from resilience, love, and the quiet strength of starting over. I was no longer working just to survive. I was building a future for myself and my children. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride. One quiet evening, as I folded tiny clothes and prepared packages for shipping, my phone buzzed with a new email. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another routine order. But when I opened it, I froze. It was from a major mother and baby retail chain based in New York. They had discovered Little Blessings online and wanted to collaborate, to bring my designs into their stores nationwide. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, my eyes welling with tears. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the soft piles of fabric around me, the same fabrics that once cluttered my cramped apartment floor, when I was just trying to survive. I turned toward my children, sleeping peacefully in their beds, their little chests rising and falling in rhythm. My heart swelled with gratitude so deep it ached. I had lost so much love, security, certainty, but in the process, I had found something far greater. I had found myself. And I knew in that moment that this was only the beginning. I never imagined I would one day stand here, not as a broken woman in a dark apartment, but as the founder of a thriving children's fashion brand. Little Blessings was no longer just an online shop run between feedings and naps. It had become a name recognized by mothers across the country, featured in blogs, articles, and even entrepreneur magazines that celebrated women who rebuilt their lives from nothing. My designs now hung on the shelves of major retail stores, worn by children I'd never met but felt deeply connected to. Looking back on that long, painful road, it still felt like a dream I once thought impossible. But the truth was, the real victory wasn't in the success, or the money, or even the recognition. The real victory was me. I was no longer the fragile woman crying behind closed doors, watching the men who abandoned her walk away. I had risen, stronger, wiser, and finally free. I had built a life that was truly mine. Every morning, I wake up in my bright, spacious apartment to the sound of laughter, my children's giggles echoing down the hall as sunlight spills through the windows. I watch them run and play, and I smile. I no longer worry about how to afford milk or count the last few coins in my wallet. Those days are gone. Now I build dreams, stitch by stitch, memory by memory, not just for me but for them. Because this time, I'm not just surviving. I'm living and thriving in the life I created with my own two hands. I can finally provide my children with a comfortable life, one where their laughter fills the rooms of a home built on love, not fear. I can think about the future now without that constant weight of uncertainty pressing on my chest. But above everything else, one truth stands out: I no longer resent Daniel. For a long time, I believed forgiveness was impossible. He had abandoned me when I needed him most, trading the warmth of his family for the cold allure of success and money. I thought the pain he caused would define me forever. But over time, I learned that resentment is just another form of captivity. Holding on to anger kept me chained to a past I had already outgrown. Daniel no longer has a place in my heart, or in my story. His choices no longer have the power to wound me. Then, one quiet afternoon, as I sat at my desk reviewing schedules for the next season's launch, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Manda, it's Daniel. Can we meet?" For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my heart strangely calm. Years had passed since I last heard his name, since the day he closed the door behind him and disappeared without looking back. I had no idea how his life had turned out, whether he found what he was chasing or whether regret had finally caught up to him. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. I set my phone down without replying. That afternoon, as the golden light poured through my office window, I scrolled through sketches for my upcoming product line. My mind drifted to the past, but for the first time, the memories didn't hurt. I remembered that small, dim apartment, the sound of my babies crying, and the crushing despair I once felt. But I also remembered everything that followed, every tear, every sleepless night, every victory I carved out with my own two hands. I was no longer that abandoned woman sitting on the floor, holding her newborns and wondering how to survive. I had become someone stronger, someone unbreakable. The days that followed were a blur of progress. I had an interview scheduled with a major lifestyle magazine to share my entrepreneurial journey, a meeting with an investor to discuss expanding Little Blessings internationally, and dozens of orders waiting to be shipped. Every moment, every step, was proof that I had moved forward. Daniel once walked out of my life, closing a door behind him. But in doing so, he unknowingly opened another, one that led me here. And I had never been more grateful for it. I had chosen a life that was truly mine, built from strength, not circumstance. And then, one quiet Sunday morning, the past found its way back to me. I had taken my children to the park, their laughter echoing through the crisp air as they chased each other across the grass. I sat on a wooden bench, smiling softly as I watched them play, when I suddenly felt a familiar gaze on me. I looked up, and there he was. Daniel. He stood just a few meters away, hesitating as if unsure whether to come closer. The man before me was a far cry from the one I remembered, the confident, composed Daniel Montgomery who once walked away without looking back. Time had carved deep lines across his face, and his eyes, once filled with certainty, now carried the heavy weight of regret. He took a step forward, then another, until he finally stood before me. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply looked up at him, calm and unshaken. "I wasn't sure if you'd even want to see me," he said softly, his voice uncertain. For a moment I said nothing. The wind rustled the leaves above us, and in that silence, I realized how little power his presence held over me now. "Then why are you here?" I finally asked. Daniel's gaze drifted toward the children playing in the distance. "I saw you in the papers," he said quietly. "Your success. Little Blessings." I realized I was wrong. I wasn't surprised. I had expected that someday he would see what I'd made of the life he once abandoned. "You realize that a little too late," I replied, my tone steady, almost indifferent. Daniel gave a sad, weary smile. "I know," he whispered. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because I expect you to forgive me, or because I want to come back. I just regret what I did. Deeply." I gave him a small nod. Are you done? He blinked, caught off guard by my composure. I stood, my eyes meeting his, not with anger or sorrow, but with quiet strength. Daniel, I said, my voice clear and unwavering, I've come a long way to be where I am today. And none of that has anything to do with you anymore. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked toward my children, their laughter guiding me forward. Behind me, Daniel remained where he stood, a lonely figure lost in memories of what he had thrown away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, I felt weightless, free. Daniel had once been part of my story, but he was no longer the main character. I was. And in that quiet victory, I realized something profound. I hadn't won against him. I had won against the pain of my past, and against the version of myself that once believed I couldn't survive without him. I walked forward, holding my children's hands, eyes ahead, no looking back, no regrets. The sunlight filtered through the trees, wrapping around us like a quiet promise of peace. I had finally learned that strength wasn't born from what you held on to, but from what you were brave enough to release. Far away, in the vast and echoing halls of the Montgomery estate, Daniel sat alone. The mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, now felt like a gilded cage. The silence inside was almost deafening. Since the day he walked out of that small apartment, leaving me and our children behind, he had gained everything his mother had promised him: wealth, status, influence. His name was spoken with respect at every business gala, his success featured in glossy magazines. And yet, none of it had filled the emptiness inside him. Lavish parties, luxury vacations, and endless streams of high-profile meetings blurred together into a monotonous haze. When the lights dimmed and the applause faded, Daniel was left staring into the quiet, a man surrounded by everything but love. The world admired him, but no one truly cared. No one saw the man beneath the polished smile. No one loved him the way I once did, unconditionally, selflessly, completely. Then, one morning, everything changed. Daniel sat in his sleek corner office, sunlight pouring through the glass windows, when a familiar voice broke through the silence. He looked up sharply, his heart skipping a beat. My voice echoed softly from the large TV mounted on the wall. There I was, sitting on a talk show set across from a well-known host, poised, confident, radiant. The host smiled warmly at me. "Your story is truly an inspiration to so many women out there," she said. "From being a single mother abandoned by your husband to building one of the most successful children's fashion brands in the country, little blessings. Can you share a little about your journey?" On the screen, I smiled gently. My gaze was calm, certain, a version of me Daniel had never known. At first I began, my voice steady yet soft, I didn't think I could do it. But then I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. I had 2 children who needed me, and I couldn't let the past hold me back forever. The show cut to clips of me working in my studio, sketching designs, laughing with my children in the park. My twins wore matching outfits I had sewn myself, their laughter pure and unrestrained. The host leaned forward, her tone warm. "Little Blessings has made such an impact in the children's fashion industry. What's the most important lesson you've learned from this journey?" I paused, smiling as the camera zoomed in closer. "That sometimes losing everything is what gives you the strength to rebuild, but this time, into something even better." Back in his office, Daniel sat motionless. The sound of my voice filled the room, wrapping around him like a memory he could never escape. For the first time in years, he realized that he had not only lost his family, he had lost the chance to truly live. I smiled again on the screen, my voice steady and assured. "The most important thing I've learned," I said, "was to believe in myself. I am no longer the woman I used to be, no longer afraid, no longer dependent on anyone. I built my happiness with my own 2 hands." Daniel felt his chest tighten as he watched. His eyes remained fixed on the television, unable to look away. It was as if he were staring at a ghost, not of me, but of the life he had thrown away. The woman on the screen was radiant, confident, and full of purpose. I was no longer the fragile, tearful woman he had abandoned years ago. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. The final image before the segment ended showed me standing beside my 2 children, all 3 of us smiling, bathed in golden light. That image lingered on the screen for a moment before fading to black. But for Daniel, it didn't fade at all. It burned in his mind, a portrait of everything he had lost. He sat there for a long time, motionless, before finally turning off the TV. But silence didn't bring peace. It only made the ache louder. He realized, with a clarity that crushed him, that he had been wrong, devastatingly, irreversibly wrong. For years he had convinced himself that leaving me had been the right thing to do, that it was for the best, that it was what his world demanded. But now, seeing me happy, fulfilled, and stronger than ever without him, he finally understood the truth. He hadn't saved himself. He had destroyed everything that truly mattered. Panic and regret surged through him as he grabbed his car keys. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know if I would even want to see him. All he knew was that he couldn't live with this silence any longer. By the time Daniel arrived at my home, the sky had deepened into shades of indigo. He hesitated at the gate, staring at the elegant house before him, so different from the small, cramped apartment he had left me in years ago. The soft glow from the windows spilled onto the driveway, warm and welcoming, a reflection of the life I had built without him. He took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened. I stood there, still me, yet not the same woman he remembered. My presence carried quiet strength. My eyes, once filled with heartbreak, now held calm certainty. There was no trace of sorrow left, only composure and grace. Daniel's mouth opened but no words came out. I crossed my arms lightly, my expression unreadable. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady, free of anger or affection, just a simple question, delivered by a woman who no longer owed him anything. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, as if every unspoken apology in the world had lodged there. "I saw you on TV," Daniel said, his voice trembling slightly. I didn't respond. I simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting. He exhaled shakily, as if the air itself had become too heavy to breathe. "I was wrong, Amanda," he said at last. "I was wrong from the beginning. I should never have left you. I let my mother control my life, and in doing so, I lost everything." I tilted my head slightly, studying him, the man who had once shattered my world. My expression remained calm, unreadable. "And now you realize that?" I asked quietly. Daniel nodded, his eyes clouded with guilt and years of regret. "I know it's too late," he said softly. "But I need you to know that I truly regret it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I need you to know that you were the only person I ever loved." For a long moment I said nothing. The silence between us stretched, not heavy but final. Then I spoke, my voice gentle yet firm. "Daniel," I said, "I don't need that." He froze, confusion flickering across his face. "What?" I smiled, but it wasn't the soft, hopeful smile he once knew. It was the quiet smile of a woman who had finally found her freedom. "I don't need to know whether you loved me or not," I said. "Because I've moved on. I've built a life I'm proud of, one that doesn't depend on you or your regrets. You are no longer part of that life." Daniel stood there, utterly still, as if the weight of my words had rooted him to the ground. The realization washed over him like a slow, cold tide. This was the end he had never imagined, the one he could no longer undo. I continued, my voice calm but resolute. "You chose your path a long time ago, Daniel. And so did I. Now I'm happy, truly happy, and I don't need a painful past finding its way back into my life." His head dropped, eyes glistening with remorse. He understood now, there was no redemption, no second chance, no doorway back to what he'd destroyed. I took a quiet breath and spoke one last time. "Take care of yourself, Daniel." Then I closed the door. He remained there for a long time, staring at the wooden barrier between us. A light breeze drifted through the corridor, carrying with it a hollow ache, the echo of something lost forever. He had once held everything, love, family, home, and had thrown it all away. Now, for the first time, he truly understood what that meant. Daniel stood motionless, his hand hovering near the door as if tempted to knock again, to beg, to plead. But deep down, he knew it was useless. The woman behind that door was no longer the same one who had once cried for him to stay. That woman was gone, rebuilt, reborn. And as Daniel turned to leave, he finally faced the truth he had spent years avoiding. He hadn't just lost me. He had lost the only real part of himself that had ever known love. He turned away, his steps heavy as he walked out of the apartment complex. The sharp gust of cold wind slipped through his coat, but he didn't even flinch. His mind was blank, a hollow void filled only with the echo of my words. You are no longer a part of my life. Those words cut through him like a blade, clean and merciless. And for the first time, Daniel knew, there was no one else to blame but himself. By the time he reached the Montgomery estate, the night had deepened into a velvet black sky. The grand mansion stood before him, its golden light spilling through the towering windows like a cruel illusion of warmth. It was still magnificent, still the same proud symbol of power, prestige, and wealth, the very things he had chosen over love, over family. But tonight, all he could see was how empty it felt. The silence inside the mansion pressed down like a weight. As he stepped into the vast marble foyer, the faint scent of oak wood and his mother's expensive perfume filled the air, elegant, cold, suffocating. Everything was immaculate, the intricate Persian rugs, the gleaming chandeliers, the oil paintings lining the walls. Every corner spoke of luxury. None of it spoke of life. Margaret Montgomery sat in her usual armchair by the fireplace, a crystal glass of red wine swirling lazily in her manicured hand. When she looked up and saw her son, there was no surprise in her eyes, only the same poised indifference that had ruled their home for decades. "Where have you been?" she asked, her tone sharp and cool. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He slipped off his coat, draping it over a chair, then crossed to the bar. The clink of glass echoed in the stillness as he poured himself a drink. "I went to see Amanda," he said finally, his voice hoarse, as if the words themselves burned coming out. For a few seconds, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then Margaret exhaled, setting her wine glass down with deliberate calm. "I suppose," she said, arching a perfectly shaped brow, "you've realized that you no longer have a place in her life." Daniel turned toward her slowly, his gaze shadowed with something darker than anger, regret, sorrow, guilt all twisted together. "You knew," he said quietly. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Of course I knew. Did you really think a woman you abandoned would sit around waiting for you forever?" Her words struck like ice. Daniel's grip tightened around the glass in his hand, the muscles in his jaw tensing. "You say that," he said, his voice low and trembling with restrained fury, "as if this wasn't your fault." The smirk faded from her face, replaced by a cold, steely stare, the same look that had once made him feel like a boy again, powerless beneath her control. Margaret let out a small, humorless chuckle, sharp and cold, echoing off the high marble walls. "My fault," she repeated, arching an eyebrow. "Daniel, I merely guided you toward the life you were born to live. You are a Montgomery heir, not some ordinary man wasting his potential on a small, forgettable family. I gave you everything." Daniel let out a bitter scoff, his laughter hollow. "Everything," he repeated, his voice rising as years of anger and pain surged to the surface. He slammed his glass down on the table, whiskey spilling across the polished mahogany like liquid gold. "You really think I have everything?" He took a shaky breath, his chest heaving. "Yes, I have money. I have a career. I have power. But do you know what else I have, Mother?" His voice cracked, raw and full of ache. "Emptiness." He stepped closer, his hands trembling. "Every morning, I wake up in this house, this cold, lifeless palace, and I walk into an office filled with people who don't respect me. They respect my name. They respect the Montgomery Empire. But not the men behind it. I'm surrounded by people, yet I've never felt more alone." Margaret sat still, her face expressionless, the flicker of the fireplace casting faint shadows across her perfectly composed features. Daniel's voice wavered as he continued, the weight of his words pressing down on him. "Meanwhile, Amanda moved on. She built something meaningful without me. Our children grew up without knowing their father. And me?" He let out a hollow laugh that quickly died in his throat. "All I have left is this empty mansion, this hollow name, and you." He gestured around at the grand room, the chandeliers, the paintings, the perfectly placed furniture. "This, everything you speak of. It's nothing. Absolutely nothing." Margaret tilted her head slightly, folding her arms with the calm poise of a queen addressing a defiant subject. "So what is it you want then, Daniel?" she asked coolly. "Do you expect me to apologize for securing your future? For making you the man you are today?" Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, Mother. You don't apologize. You never have. You never regret anything, do you?" He shook his head slowly, his voice growing quieter but steadier. But I do. Margaret's lips parted slightly, the first crack in her flawless composure, as Daniel met her eyes, his gaze weary and unflinching. I regret listening to you, he said, each word deliberate, heavy. I regret walking away from Amanda. I regret missing the first steps, the first words, the birthdays, the laughter, everything that should have mattered. His voice faltered, but he pushed through, his eyes burning with quiet resolve. But most of all, I regret letting you control my life for so many years. For the first time, Margaret looked unsettled. Her hands tightened slightly on the armrest, the faintest tremor crossing her expression. Daniel drew in a deep breath, the kind that felt like release. I'm leaving, he said finally, his voice low but unwavering. The words hung in the air like a final verdict, the first true act of rebellion in a lifetime spent under his mother's shadow. Margaret sat up abruptly, the sharpness in her movement breaking through the calm composure she always carried like armor. What did you just say? Her voice was low, but the tremor beneath it betrayed her disbelief. Daniel glanced around the mansion, the grand chandelier glinting above, the oil paintings that lined the walls, the gleaming marble floors, and the expensive decor that once symbolized success and power. He had spent years believing these things defined him, that they gave his life meaning. But now, as his gaze swept across the room, all of it felt hollow, a beautiful, gilded cage. I said I'm leaving, he repeated quietly but firmly. I can't keep living like this. He paused, his tone softening with resolve. I don't know where I'll go. I don't know what I'll do. But I can't stay here any longer. Margaret rose from her chair, her usual mask of calm slipping, revealing something between anger and panic. You're acting like a fool, Daniel, she snapped. Do you really think you can just walk away from everything? If you step out of that door, you'll lose your inheritance, your position, everything I've built for you. Daniel turned to face her, and for the first time in his life, his expression was one of complete peace. A faint smile tugged at his lips, not of joy but of release. You're right, he said softly. If I leave, I'll lose everything. He paused, meeting her eyes. But the truth is, I already lost what mattered most a long time ago. Without another word, he reached for his coat. The weight of years of choices, expectations, and regrets seemed to lift from his shoulders with every step he took toward the door. The echo of his footsteps followed him down the marble hall, until the heavy front doors closed behind him with a deep, final sound. No one called after him. No one tried to stop him. Only one man walked away from a world built on illusions, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Morning sunlight streamed through the wide windows of my home, spilling warmth across the polished wooden floors. The sound of my children's laughter filled the air, bright and alive, mingling with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee. I sat at my desk, fingers gliding across the keyboard as I reviewed new contracts for Little Blessings, the brand I had once started with nothing but hope and a borrowed sewing machine. It still amazed me sometimes, how far I had come. From a struggling, heartbroken mother abandoned at her weakest, to a woman who had built her own empire from the ground up. Today, Little Blessings was no longer just a small online shop selling handmade baby clothes. It had become a nationally recognized name, featured in magazines, celebrated for its quality and purpose, and displayed proudly in major retail chains across the U.S. But beyond all the success, what mattered most was something simpler, something deeper. I had rebuilt my life piece by piece, with my own two hands. And this time, it belonged entirely to me. I had even opened 2 flagship stores, one in New York and another in Los Angeles, where young mothers came daily to find beautifully designed clothing for their children. Every day was busier than the last, yet I never felt tired. Because everything I had, every success, every smile, every peaceful morning, was built by my own hands. No one handed it to me. I didn't rely on anyone. And most importantly, I no longer needed Daniel's validation. The day he walked away from the Montgomery estate, leaving behind the luxury and prestige he had once fought so desperately to protect, I didn't even know. It wasn't until much later that I heard he had given up his inheritance, severed ties with his mother, and started over from nothing. But none of that mattered anymore. I no longer thought of him with resentment. In fact, I didn't think of him much at all. He was a part of my past, a past that no longer had any power over me. That afternoon, I took my children to the park. The sun was warm, the grass lush and green, and the sound of their laughter echoed like music in the open air. They ran freely, their joy pure and unburdened, a living reminder of how far we had come. I sat on a nearby bench, sipping my coffee and savoring the peace I had fought so hard to achieve. A woman sat down beside me, her face lighting up with recognition. "You're Amanda, aren't you?" she asked, smiling warmly. "The founder of Little Blessings." I nodded with a polite smile. "Oh my God, I'm such a huge fan of yours," she exclaimed. "I've been following your journey for so long. Your story is truly inspiring. You've done what so many women dream of. You rose from pain, rebuilt your life, and turned it into something extraordinary." Her words caught me off guard, but they also filled my heart with a quiet, profound warmth. "I just did what I had to do," I said softly. "I refused to let my circumstances define my future." The woman smiled, her eyes glistening. "Thank you for sharing your story," she said. "You've given strength to so many people, more than you probably realize." As she stood and walked away, I looked out over the park once more. My children were chasing each other through the sunlight, their laughter floating on the breeze. And for the first time, I truly understood, happiness isn't something you find in others. It's something you build within yourself. I watched as the woman walked away, my heart full of emotion. I had never imagined that my story could inspire others, but in that moment, I finally understood. What I had built wasn't just about providing for my children or making a living. It was about hope. About strength. About proving that even after being broken, a woman can rise again. I had become a symbol of resilience, a woman who refused to be defined by her past. That evening, I sat on the living room couch, my 2 children curled up in my arms, their soft breaths syncing with mine. I began to tell them a bedtime story, not one filled with princes, castles, or fairy godmothers, but one about a woman who faced storms and built her own sunshine. "Did she end up happy, Mommy?" my little girl asked, her round eyes glowing with innocence. I smiled, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "She created her own happiness." Later, as I turned off the lights and quietly stepped out of their room, I paused at the doorway, watching them sleep peacefully. Their tiny hands clutched their blankets, their faces calm and safe, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. I didn't need a man to complete me. I didn't need anyone to save me. Because I had saved myself. My life, my happiness, my future, every bit of it had been rebuilt by my own hands. And as I stood there in the warm glow of the nightlight, I knew one thing for certain. I was finally in control of my destiny. Life doesn't always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes it breaks us before it rebuilds us. But it's in how we face those moments of despair that our true strength is revealed. Amanda's story isn't about revenge or regret, it's about growth, resilience, and reclaiming your power. She rose from abandonment and heartbreak to build a life filled with purpose and love, not because someone saved her, but because she chose to save herself. This story stands as a tribute to every woman who has ever been broken, doubted, or left behind, a reminder that you can always rise again, stronger than before.